Welcome. And apologies for those of you that joined earlier. We had some issues with the sound on the streaming. So we've restarted and we will now go into the full PQT for the full 30 minutes again. I am Clare Moody, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Avon and Somerset. And every month we hold a live broadcast where I invite the Chief Constable to answer questions on the performance of Avon and Somerset Police and what is being done to address the key concerns of the public about policing in our area. This month, we're going to be talking about investigating crime. Investigating crime was graded as requires improvement by the Inspectorate in their latest report on Avon and Somerset Police. Priority 5 of my police and crime plan is improve standards in policing. Investigating crime is clearly a part of that priority. I also want to mention that we advertised that we would have a question in this programme about missing people. However, I've decided that that topic was too big just to have one question in a wider programme about investigations. So we will be going back to that for an episode of PQT that will have more time to focus on investigations into missing persons. So now, let me welcome Chief Constable Sarah Crew.
Hi everyone and hi Claire.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you for joining us today. So, straight into it. And my first question is based on the areas for improvement which the Inspectorate identified. And the quote from that report is, "The constabulary should carry out timely investigations into all reported crimes and make sure that officers take all investigative opportunities." So why are there unnecessary delays in the process? And what are you doing to improve it and respond to that AFI?
Okay, absolutely. And there are lots of things we're doing, but if I start at the beginning of the process, so that's when crimes are recorded, they're classified, and based on their classification and the lines of inquiry available, they're assigned to officers to investigate. What we have seen are rises in the numbers of crimes that we're recording in 2024. That was about 13,000 extra crimes. So that is having an impact. There have been some delays in that classification and allocation process. As a result, what we've done is we've invested in people and in training for those people, so that we've got the right resources at the front of that process to record the crimes, to allocate them appropriately and quickly. It does cause some of that growth, another challenge. The number of allocated crimes per officer, if I give an example, in 2014, an average officer would carry about 13 crimes. But actually that can be, 13 crimes a year they'd have. Now it's about 40. So that, the volume does have an impact as well. Of those crimes that are being recorded, so that's the first stage of delay, they are also more complex. So in terms of the types of crimes that are being reported, so if I give some indications, the internet child abuse teams, that we've seen in 2024, something like 1,500% rise. So in actual numbers, that's about 1,250 extra crimes, which are very complex. Another example might be 2024 again, rape and serious sexual offending. We've seen a 207% increase in the number of crimes being recorded. That's about another 4,400 crimes. So not only have we got more crimes, they're more complex. That's required us, and many of those crimes require not just more resources, but they need specialist resources and specialist training to be able to deal with them well. We've obviously seen the Police Uplift programme over the past 4 years, and that has seen us grow in the number of officers we've been particularly focused in growing in our CID teams, not just filling the gaps we had, but putting more in, but building the skills, expertise and confidence to investigate those more complex crimes has taken time. Those programmes bringing people into policing take 3 years or 2 years. We've just hit, even starting 5 years ago now, we've just hit our aspiration in CID to fill all the gaps, grow to where we need to be, and to get to 85% of those officers being accredited to carry out those kind of investigators. We only achieved that in March this year. So that gives a sense of you can't turn the tap and it makes a difference immediately. But it means that we've now got people with the specialist skills able to respond to that growth in crimes and that growth in complex crimes. Each of those crimes as well, and this is some reason why more are being allocated for investigation, have what we call a digital footprint. We all carry around a phone, we all have devices. Those are brilliant lines of inquiry. They also might be relevant, not just as evidence, but as information that's needed for trial. It might disprove, for instance, that someone was involved. Each of those devices needs to be considered in an investigation. In a great deal of those investigations, we will need to carry out some forensic analysis. Now, that's not done by the investigating officer. That requires specialist skills and accreditation. And we send that to a different department.
Outside of Avon.
Outside of, we're part of it. So we respond to this because it's the most efficient and effective way as a Southwest region. So the other 4 forces in the Southwest, Devon and Cornwall, Dorset, Gloucester, Wiltshire, we all collaborate together on building a team of these specialists with the specialist technology to be able to take in all of those devices and analyse them to support investigations. As the growth in not just the number of devices we carry, but their memory has increased, that's become more and more of a challenge, and each one of those devices takes longer to investigate, therefore, and each one, and the volumes increase, it brings delay. What we have done as a region, again, money is in short supply, so we have done this as a region. We've invested over a 5-year period, we're in year 2, in both the people we need, the technology we need across the region to be able to be as efficient and effective and as future-proofed as we can be, to be able to deal with those cases as quickly as possible. It's still not as quickly as we would like, but we are seeing the growth in the time frames stabilising and start to reduce. So 2 years in, we're starting to see the effect of that, but it does add on to the overall length of an investigation. There will be large periods where the officer in the case will be waiting for that key information to come back before they can move forward. I think the last thing I'd say about the challenges we have, sometimes our organisational structure, we're very centralised between our different departments, is sometimes caused, I'd call them silos, complexity, lack of clarity of who should be investigating a particular crime. Now, that slowed things down quite often when people are saying, well, it should be you, it should be you. And that's something the Inspectorate noticed, and it's something we were already aware of. In the very short term, we've responded by improving and clarifying that ownership, that responsibility, what sits where, and improving our allocation policy so it gets there very quickly. In the more medium term, we will be looking at our organisational structures to make sure that there's more local leadership and local accountability at the local level to make sure those crimes are approached in a very much in a team-focused way to deal with them as quickly as possible. So there are a number of reasons, in summary, stop from the right to the end, right through the process, and we've taken steps at each stage to make sure we're investing where we need to be, to building up capability, to putting in technology and tools to make us as quick as we can be. We'd like to be quicker, but it's a balance that we have to manage.
So it's the numbers of crimes, it's the recording of those crimes, it's the numbers of officers, and in this instance, in CI, the number of people in CID.
Yeah.
It's the complexity in those cases, and that if you're dealing with, for example, rape and serious sexual offences, inevitably, they are more complex crimes. But it's also then the ownership and accountability in being answerable for that investigation.
Yes, I think, and if I could add one other fact that probably brings all of that together is we're very inexperienced still as an organisation.
With the new officers.
Absolutely, and some more than 50% of our police officers have less than 5 years service.
Yes.
Now, they're very highly trained now, but in those circumstances, you also need to have really confident, competent, experienced, capable sergeants and supervisors. So another area of focus for us is making sure that our sergeants, who are quite inexperienced in themselves, many, have the skills and the confidence and the capability, as well as the tools they need to be able to help their officers identify what lines of inquiries they need to follow, be very focused in their investigations, and to make sure that they're continually being those crimes are being supervised and being given the right focus and direction.
Thank you. And of course, in all of this, while this delay is, sort of these delays are happening in the system, the technology as well, which touching on, but there are victims whose cases are being investigated, and there's two elements of that, and I just wanted to explore quickly what the protections that are in place, if there are, and again I'm going to bring this back to the rape and serious sexual offences cases, what protection is there for keeping those victims safe, and what communication is there with them about the delays?
Yeah, so all crimes, when they, we look at crimes through a couple of key lenses. The first one, and the one we're talking about today, is the investigation, the bringing offenders to justice. But we're also looking at it from the safeguarding, keeping people safe perspective. So, at every stage of that process, when we're recording, even when it's being reported to us into our control room, we're also thinking, what referrals to other agencies do we need to make this person safe? What safety planning needs to be in place? And in many ways, that comes first. First, keep someone safe. So that's the first thing. At every stage of the process, that's a lens we apply. And I know we talked about victims at PQT last time. Yeah. The second is we do comply with the Victims Code of Practice, which involves a conversation, a contract, if you will, with that victim. When do you want to be? How often do you want to be contacted? By what means? And irrespective of where we are in the investigative process, we're also supervising to make sure and monitoring with the various ways that we can within the constabulary, our data, our applications, to make sure we are compliant with the Victims Code of Practice. So if a victim wants to be have an update every 28 days, making sure that we are keeping to that contract.
Thank you, Sarah. Another specific point highlighted by the inspectorate was, and again I'm going to quote from their report, supervisors in specialist rape investigation teams and the criminal investigation department were themselves managing between 80 and 170 unallocated crimes, some of which had been unallocated for a number of months. So we're talking about really serious crimes here. Having unallocated cases for months has to be unacceptable to you and obviously to the wider public. So can you explain if this has been rectified?
Yes, certainly, and I can understand why people would be concerned reading that or hearing that. But it's also right to say there are a number of practical reasons why something might not be assigned to an officer in the case straight away. But let me explain how we've responded and are responding to that area for improvement. The first thing to say is Once a crime is classified, it's identified that it needs to go to the Criminal Investigation Department, or indeed a part of it called Operation Bluestone for those rape and serious sexual offences. That crime is sent to the tray, and it has immediate oversight by the detective sergeant overseeing that tray. That's managed on a duty basis, so it's not a case of, well, somebody's off for 4 days. That's constant throughout. We even have officers who work nights within our CID department. So there is immediate oversight, and what that identifies is, are there fast-track actions we need to take right now to secure and preserve evidence? And within that comes that lens that I've just talked about. Are there referrals we need to make to other agencies, to other parts of our organisation, to make sure that a victim may be safeguarded? There may be also other things we need to do in terms of safety planning. So it might be that our Safer Homes team need to go and install some kind of physical security, or it might be that we need to provide people with some contact details, information markers, so when they call the police, there's an enhanced response. So that fast-track action, that safety planning, that safeguarding, that happens immediately, irrespective. So unallocated can create the impression something's just sitting there and nothing's happened. That immediate oversight takes place, and until there is that case is assigned to an investigator, that remains. Now, I said sometimes there are purposeful delays of why things aren't allocated immediately. So sometimes a crime will be referred by another police force. It won't have all the information we need to make the right decisions about what needs to happen next. It's more efficient and effective for that crime to remain under that sergeant's oversight before giving it to an officer in the case. They can progress the inquiries, they can do the chasing that's needed to gain that information.
So some unallocated crimes are actually being
deliberately
investigated in a sense, that information being gathered.
Absolutely. So they're very purposefully being kept under the oversight of the sergeant, the supervisory officer. Now, there will also be a category of crime, and we found it through Operation Bluestone, and it's got a name that's been identified by the academics, and it's a phenomenon called telling, not reporting. So these are cases that people will have wanted to report to the police an incident. Sometimes they might not recognise it as a crime. It might have arisen because we've been risk assessing, and in risk assessing that crime, they've disclosed something that we would record as a crime, but they've been very, very deliberate. I do not want you to investigate this. I'm not seeking a criminal justice outcome. What I am doing is I'm telling you about this because I want you to know perhaps about a perpetrator, but I am also seeking help and support. Now, those crimes, again, they will be under the oversight of that sergeant. The person has said, I don't want them investigated. So they won't make the decision, I'm going to pass them on to an officer in the case to progress an investigation. But what they will do is ensure that the right victim support has happened. So in this case, input from an independent sexual violence advisor, a consideration of the safety planning and the safeguarding, submission of intelligence reports about that perpetrator. It may be even more follow-up through the independent sexual violence advisor, or indeed another officer, about gathering information and an intelligence so that we can be truly perpetrator focused. So in that occasion, again, it's a purposeful reason why the sergeant's keeping oversight of that crime. But then going to those crimes that do require investigation, you asked me how well we're doing. Well, the average time, or the median time for a rape crime to be allocated now is 1.8 days. And given that you'll see that officers do take time off, actually there will be times when somebody's not in the office to progress a crime. 1.8 days is a massive improvement of where we have been in the past. I think it's also right to say we could hit the target and miss the point. on this particular measure, because we could be very automatic, and as soon as the crime arrives, automatically assign it to an investigator. That doesn't necessarily mean that that investigator is progressing it in a very effective and efficient way, because perhaps their workload is too high. So we also keep a really close eye on the crimes that are sitting with an officer in the case, where they are they coping, have they got the right support and resources available. Just passing it to them and not looking at it, again, would be hiding perhaps problems. So what we do is we make sure we're not over-allocating to any one individual officer, but we keep really close oversight on what they have, as well as what might not have been allocated yet. And to do that, we've got an application, an app, again using our ClickSense methodology, so that anyone in the organisation, the supervisors right up through the CID department, but more broadly, we can scrutinise where all those crimes are sitting, how long they've been there, who has them, has there been a delay. So we've got also that monitored oversight of where all these things are. I said in answer to the first question that we've seen significant rises in crime being reported, and particularly those crimes that sit in the CID, particularly rape and serious sexual offences. The fact that we've been able to reduce the time that those cases requiring allocation are allocated, and I said 1.8 days on average, at a time when we're seeing massive numbers of crime, shows that we have made some significant progress on this particular issue. We've got to do more, and we want it to be instantaneous, but we don't want it to be instantaneous, as I say, at the expense of making it look like we're doing well, but not having really tight control and management of where those crimes are being investigated and how they're being investigated. So I can say with some confidence, the impression that people may have formed that crimes are sitting there with no one looking at them for large periods of time, I don't think that's ever been the case, and it's certainly not the case now. If crimes are being investigated, the time period now between recording, sergeant input and allocation is much smaller, despite the rise in the number of crimes being reported to us. And even if they're not, in that short gap, those crimes are purposely being supervised, and the necessary fast-track actions that should be taking place are taking place.
So would you say, taking into account all the points that you've made around this as well, would you say it's improved since the peel inspection?
I would say it's significantly improved, but I'd also challenge the word unallocated.
Right.
It's a very technical word that I understand, but it gives an impression that nothing is being done, and that has never been the case, and it isn't the case. It's some of those cases are sitting with the sergeant who is making sure the actions that need to happen are happening, or deliberately, because they are the right person to deal with those particular inquiries. Cases do not sit not being allocated. So I think I wanted to be clear on, because it will create, as you've raised, a concern that things are not being progressed. They are always being progressed. It's just who's progressing them and who's the right person to progress them. And even if they're with an officer in the case, that they're still being progressed well. They're not sitting in a workload that is not being supervised, and it is too much for an individual officer to be able to manage.
And I think when it comes to the, as we're discussing here, rape cases, trust and confidence is hugely important, and some of the increase in numbers of reporting, I think we have evidence to say that is because there is higher trust and confidence because of the change in the way that these cases are being investigated. And so ensuring that there is that understanding about allocation and that there is work being done to make that these cases are progressed properly and effectively.
Absolutely, and I can point to lots of independent testimony that would suggest that rise is at least partly, and I'd say mostly, because of a rise in trust and confidence. And the independent survey of rape victims that's been done nationally by one of the City University in London would say that for Avon and Somerset there has been improvement in trust and confidence. But your own commission service and SafeLink, independent sexual violence advisors, would say that they feel confident in now advising people coming to them, not as police referrals, to have trust and confidence in doing that. And the measure is also in the results. So, you know, we've seen a quadrupling of the number of cases that are now entering the criminal justice service as prosecutions. You know, and that's a partnership between the police and the Crown Prosecution Service. But despite those rises, we are seeing more and more cases being successfully entered into the criminal justice and prosecution process, albeit you know, they meet their own delays when they reach that stage.
Another extreme large topic, which perhaps we will return to as well. So, moving on in the wider investigations piece, a key outcome from crimes being reported to the police is for offenders to be brought to justice. Yeah, that's why people report, and it's certainly what the public want to see. So from a policing perspective, the term used is positive outcomes when there is that, you know, kind of process, charge or caution or whatever the outcome is. Over the last year, your positive outcome rate was 10.4%, which means that there's visible justice in only 1 out of 10 crimes recorded. It's also something that I hear from the public a lot, as you can imagine, that they feel that the police don't take enough action to investigate when, for example, they say they've got CCTV evidence or other evidence that they've brought to the police. So what are you doing to improve the quality of the investigations and to help secure better outcomes from the investigation?
So I completely understand the concern public would have and the perception it creates. You know, most of my career was spent as a detective. I pride myself on us being able to investigate well. It's a core competency of policing. So it's an area that we're working really hard to improve. If I look across all the areas that the public would expect us to be good at, you know, responding to emergencies consistently and well, preventing crime, disrupting criminals, being visible in our communities, I'd say either within the inspection or since the inspection, I can point to data saying we're improving or we're stable. But this is an area, it's a stubborn one, that we need to improve in. So it's getting lots of focus. So we do have an investigation standards committee, which we've stood up, chaired by an assistant chief constable, so really senior oversight. All our heads of department or directorates, as we call them, are there, along with the enabling services that support them. So, for instance, we talked about forensics earlier on. All the people who've got a vested interest in that process, where we can monitor what's happened, we can understand where improvement needs to be made, and we can hold people accountable for making those improvements. So I want to say that because I want the public to know we're taking this seriously. There's a serious amount of senior time and investment in focusing on improving our investigative standards. We have set up an operation which very much is the engine room of that committee, called Operation Homes. It involves all the operational and tactical level, the more junior subject matter experts, and they've reviewed and are reviewing the end-to-end process of investigation. I've given a sense of that earlier in my questions, to identify where are all the opportunities along the way, small and big, that we can improve. And they found lots of different ways that we can improve the way we investigate and also the way we support victims, because they come together. If victims don't stay with the process, we lose an opportunity to to achieve a positive outcomes. Dozens and dozens of improvements, and we've seen some improvement. I think that's done very much in concert with our colleagues in the Crime Prosecution Service. Investigations, particularly those that reach a charge, really are a partnership. The CPS make the charging decision, but we have to work together through that process of investigation to make sure we reach the threshold for charging. That can often involve lots of interactions, either early advice, working together, making sure the quality of our case files are improving. So under Operation Holmes, with the Crime Prosecution Service, and you will know, Clare, this through the scrutiny you give us at the Local Criminal Justice Board, that we've made real improvements on the quality of our case files, and not just on they've all got the bits they need to reach the next stage, but the quality of the evidence that's being provided to achieve that charging decision has been made. So lots of work going on there. We're also looking at how we value investigative standards and the achievement of outcomes for the public, bringing offenders to justice within our performance framework. So that is just in the process of transitioning from measuring lots of activity to actually focusing on the outcomes themselves and the quality of things. So that is informing that committee and its work and its scrutiny. I said earlier, I do think, and it was something the inspectorate picked up as well, is local accountability for outcomes for local areas, I think needs to improve. So later in the year, we will be moving to a more geographic arrangement for supervision with local commanders who are accountable, who are much closer to the frontline investigators for making sure things are joining up, are happening as they should, closer to the ground, and feeling accountable for the delivery of that. So,
exactly.
So that's another plank in our efforts here. I talked earlier about that capability and capacity. We've done well through the Police Uplift programme to fill our gaps, increase our workforce a little bit, but we also have to build up the competency, the confidence, the knowledge, the skills, particularly for those complex crimes. And I've talked about how we've done that. We're starting to see some benefit of that now, and that's where maybe some of those improvements in our case file quality has come. But it's not just about people, it's also about using technology as well. So if I give a couple of examples of where technology can help us in the investigative process. One area is, again, supported with some investment from you, is an AI tool, artificial intelligence, called SOSAE. It's tried and tested. It's used in the Southern Hemisphere. We're the first force in the Northern Hemisphere to be trialling and testing it, and we're in that phase now. But it uses AI to do a lot of the analysis of all that digital footprint, the social media, the phones, the CCTV, the images, all together, to help the investigators trawl through what are mountains of data. That speeds things up, but it means we get to the clues much quicker. And in our testing, we have found, real examples we can point to where we found information we wouldn't have found by other means much quicker, and it's helped us charge a case. And that's being applied in some of those most serious cases where there's so much of that information. So SOSAE is one thing we're testing. Another that we're in the early stages of introducing is something called the evidence-based investigation tool. Again, it is tried and tested in other force areas. We are, and again, uses some evidence from the Cambridge Harm Index to use some algorithms, if you like, to help us identify those cases quickly, have got the best chance of being solved. So we can put our energy into those cases that are best chance of being solved. If we do that, we can also look at the other cases those offenders may have committed that might have any clues on their own, but we can link those crimes
Part
that
of a
way.
pattern.
And pick out link series. So it helps us in that way. We haven't introduced it yet. we are trialling it and testing it. We don't introduce things unless we think they're going to work. And I know it's something that your team are heavily invested in checking that it works effectively before we use it extensively. So it's building our human capability, but it's also using technology to augment that human capability. You also talked about justice. Now that can come in different forms. Often it's it's a trial or a guilty plea at the end of a criminal justice process. But we also know that sometimes justice delayed is justice denied, and in some cases, an out-of-court disposal or a deferred prosecution, which is something else we've introduced in the last 12 months, might be a route to take. So these would be cases that attract a caution, a condition of caution, or a case where the prosecution, if you like, is held subject to someone agreeing to and completing a course of rehabilitative or education to enable us to reduce them offending again. We have introduced some technology to help our officers identify those cases in conjunction with the victims where those options might be a viable opportunity, so that justice happens quickly and there's greater victim satisfaction, but also we're taking every opportunity early to reduce people who are reoffending again. So we've reduced an app to help us do that, and we've introduced, with your support, those schemes, those programs of intervention, and that helps with the overall backlogs within the criminal, the prosecution process, so other people see justice early. And my last area would be, and I think we probably mentioned it before, and I hope we'll mention it again, is Project Bright Light. So we've previously involved academics coming in to look at how we've dealt with rape investigations. That happened in 2021. What came from that was Operation Bluestone, now the National Operation Soteria, and it's behind, I truly believe, the improvement that we've seen in our rape and serious sexual offence investigations. And we know that we're not 10% there. We're top quartile nationally in our investigation outcomes, and in CID we're 24%. So in the most serious crimes we're doing better, which is good, but that's because they've taken that learning that we've gathered. So we're applying that same approach now with trusted academics, looking at how we're dealing with domestic abuse. Now, domestic abuse crimes are 20% of the crimes that are recorded every year, and those academics are looking back over 3 years. And they're able, we hope, to give us a really true insight on those gaps where we're failing, so that we can improve them, to improve our overall approach to investigation and achieve much better results, particularly those victim-based crimes where offenders are brought to justice. So we're in the phase where they are looking at all of the information, talking to all of the people, gathering. They will be soon reporting back to us, and we'll be willing to share, where are the areas for improvements. And that will feed that the Investigative Standards Committee, the AACC, my senior leads in their work. It will feed that engine room within Operation Holmes, and it will be done in concert with our colleagues in the Crown Prosecution Service and across the wider criminal justice system to improve. So I've got huge amounts happening in this area, lots still to come, but this, I hope I've given the impression, because it's a sincere one, where my own individual focus is placed on this is the area where we most need to improve, I think.
Thank you, Sarah. And I would say, with all that's going on, firstly, like you, I'm really looking forward to that honest analysis from the academics about the as-is, the situation is currently, and the recognition of what areas that need to improve. And although their focus is on domestic abuse, because of the significant scale of that crime, it will have a wider impact as well as importantly addressing domestic abuse cases. So thank you. I know we have gone on longer than the usual time that we have for PQT, but I think there was a lot of important information there, and talking about, uncovering and, sharing with the audience the journey, to use a phrase, that is on process to address specifically in that last piece about the positive outcome rate, the consequence for people of an investigation. So again, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you for those of you at home who have been joining us today. I hope you found this session interesting and informative, and I know that we get a lot of questions in that you'd like us to raise and to go through at a future PQT. So please do continue to send those questions in, and particularly, as I mentioned at the start of the programme, we included one question on missing persons investigations, or we're going to for this programme, but actually want to have a focus on that, a much larger focus in future. So please do send your questions in on that specific issue, as well as any other issues that you would like us to talk through at a future PQT. Details of the next PQT, which will be in May, will be shared on my website and on social media in the coming days and weeks. And also, your feedback is always welcome. So please also feel free to share your feedback. Thank you again, and I hope see you in May.